Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this most fantastic session at the Impact Lounge. My name is Vicki Shabo. I am a senior fellow at a think tank in Washington, D.C. called New America. I focus on gender equity policy, so very on point for this panel, and also started a project focused on entertainment-based storytelling around work, family, caregiving, and gender roles. And you have some of our swag on your chair. I took moderator's privilege for that. But I'm really, really excited to kick off this panel, which I think is so universal to folks who come to Sundance and folks in particular who are at the Impact Lounge, which is at our core, we want stories to shape hearts and minds, to change culture, and hopefully to change, in some cases, to change policy. And certainly for the films that we're talking about today, the projects that we're talking about today, these are really were created, and we'll hear more from our panelists about that, but created with the idea of having an impact on people's lives, on the rules that we set for society, and on the humanity that we recognize in public policies and in the way that laws and culture treat people, and in particular treat women and recognize full equality and humanity and safety as being fundamental to our lives and our dignity. So we're gonna, have a discussion here, and I am gonna allow the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we will just dig right into the topics at hand. How many folks in this room are storytellers, are filmmakers, or creators? Great, exciting. We're gonna also have some time at the end for questions and answers and reflections. Great, I'm gonna pass it to Charlotte to introduce herself.
Good morning. My name is Charlotte Lubert. I'm from Without Exception Films. I'm the founder of Without Exception Films, and I have a docuseries called Unmuted, which we're going to be talking about this morning. Great to see you all here. Thank you for coming.
Great. And Nisha?
I'm Nisha Pahuja. I'm a documentary filmmaker based in Toronto, and I run a company called Notice Pictures, Inc., and we're going to talk about To Kill a Tiger, which inspired a movement called Stand With Her.
Well, thank you. And Brian?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Walker. I'm the CEO of Picture Motion, and we're a social impact marketing company that works with filmmakers, storytellers, really any type of artist to bring their content to important audiences, stakeholders, to drive real-world change. And today I want to kind of speak to the way in which we build allyship and really help to support campaigns like Unmuted, which we've been working on as well.
So let's give a round of applause for our folks here before we dig in. I think what's really special about this panel is we are looking at a range of formats. So Charlotte's project Unmuted is 3 30-minute films about different topics around gender-based violence. Nisha's film is a feature film. Brian works on docs and on scripted. We at New America have recently done a short scripted impact campaign around a film called Cow Heavy and Floral. And so I think one of the things we really want to instill is that impact can be paired with any kind of storytelling, any kind of film, any kind of television, any kind of theater for that matter. And we're really excited to think about the ways in which people who are working in communities can influence how stories are told, as well as how they're disseminated and the impact that they have. I also want to just give a sensitive content warning here. We're going to be talking about some very heavy topics. We're going to see some clips about very heavy topics. Safety and mental health are really, really obviously very important. We're all people, as well as living professional lives around stories in this room. And so if you need to step out, we're not going to be offended. Please take care of yourself and the people around you. So with that, Charlotte, I want to turn to you first to talk about Unmuted, which is a docuseries about different really, really horrific, to be blunt, types of gender-based violence. Sometimes we think of these things only as problems we know that they're problems here. Obviously, we're living through very horrific times here in the US, and I think we have to say that. I was reading the news this morning, and it was crushing and overwhelming and angering. We also think about problems around democracy and fascism and gender-based violence as being problems in other countries. And what I loved about Unmuted is that you tied US and international situations together to show the peril that women often face in lots of different situations. So before we get into Unmuted, I think we're ready for the trailer.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Breaking news overnight as Honolulu police are investigating an attempted murder.
He allegedly threw acid on her and fled the scene.
The acid had actually melted the skin to her sides.
And it feels like my body's a crime scene,
One of the most harmful forms of gender-based violence is female genital mutilation and cutting.
Somebody is putting pressure on your chest, somebody hold your leg.
Mine took place when I was 3. So he was practicing his religion with a scalpel.
12 million underage girls are still forced into wedlock every year.
When you're married before 18, you're still a minor.
Right.
So you can't go to a shelter. You can't apply for benefits. You can't even hire a lawyer because you can't enter into a legal contract.
If they approach to us, they have only hope. So we have to help them.
I'm Tori DeVito. I'm Marie Abderopoulos.
I'm Constance Wu, and I will be meeting some of the women who have undergone FGMC when they were just young girls.
I'm blessed with the right to choose when and who I'm going to marry. Unlike the 12 million underage girls every year who are forced into marriage against their will. I am meeting with 3 remarkable women whose lives were forever changed after being doused by acid.
I had been looking for opportunities for women to get care.
What's going on in your mind?
Happiness.
I want to get your nose looking more like it used to look, so we take the skin from here and then rotate it down.
She's just come to for me to rescue her. I could not let her go.
They were just taken out of the school and parents are getting them married. So the biggest threat to a girl's education is child marriage.
When we enter the school, we feel free.
It all boils down to money for poor families.
Oh, are you lovely, lady? I'm good.
They feel like their womanhood was taken, their part of their body is gone, and when the surgery is done, they feel like something is back.
There are networks of people now that are shedding light on it, and they're going to the state senates and they're changing the laws.
We do some plays and dances to understand that they can actually change things for themselves.
The girl should get the chance to improve herself. I want to stop the child marriage.
She can't help but stop smiling because it just changes everything.
Change begins with the individuals. And eventually, the individual change affects the community.
You don't really understand how strong your body is until it's put to the test. I feel like every one of us is stronger than we think.
These are some heavy stories, and what I loved when I watched this was how easy it was in some ways to resonate with what the protagonists were feeling and expressing about the hope, even in this darkness. So Charlotte, I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about what made you interested in tackling these topics? How did you come to this?
So 20 years ago, I moved to Dubai with my 3 children, my husband and my dog. And at the time, we set up a company over there. And through the success of our company, we were able to go to India and sponsor a school there for girls. And we sponsored the building of the school. And when it came time to actually open the school, I got delegated to go down to India and to meet some of the 1,500 girls in school there. So this is a small, tiny place, a rural place in between Delhi and Agra, in a place called Vrindavan, which is a really holy place. It's where Lord Krishna was born. And there, I got to meet some of the 1,500 girls in school. And whilst I was there, I got to visit one of their homes, and one of the homes of the girls. And I went there, and when I got there, I got to meet the mum. And this is mum. She's just this most beautiful Indian lady. She's tall, she's proud, and she's got Sanskrit writing all over her face. And I get to meet this lady, she's unbelievable, and she's there with her 4 daughters, all sat round doing their homework on the floor, on the ground. And I'm a mum of 4 by this time. I've got 4 boys, she's got 4 girls, so we're kind of greeting each other mother to mother. And I'm getting to meet her and learn about her what's going on in her life. And she's here with the girls on the ground doing their homework. And the only difference is that they're living in a hut made out of mud and trash next to where they're doing the homework. And she's cooking on an open fire. But this lady knows the importance of education, and she makes sure that her girls, her daughters, turn up at school every single day looking like princesses, looking like they've come from a castle, looking just amazing, because she knows the importance of education. And being there, that really stuck with me. You know, it gave me a moment of just opportunity to take this in. And I wanted to bring this story to the world and to my own boys. So I got the opportunity to do that when several years later, I moved to LA, and the founder of the organization came to LA and asked me to get more involved. So I put together a committee, and being in LA, as everyone knows, the first thing I say to them is, what do you want to do? How do you want to make a difference? And they just say, let's make a film. So I've never done that before, but so within the next few months, I'm on a plane back to India with a crew and a director, and that's where the journey in film started. And that's where the whole thing started, with the films.
And how did you tackle 3 really difficult and important topics here, and you tell them across a range of contexts.
Yeah.
How did you come to that decision, and how did you think about impact at the outset as you were choosing the topics, the protagonists, and the format?
Well, we got together as we were going along. We found different people joined the team. You know, we went through this over 9 years. So we came up with topics which we felt very strongly and passionate about, and also we were drawn into them through organisations that we were working with. So I had people, you know, I had things happening in my own backyard where, you know, we were living, not just in India, not just overseas. And we got to see there were so many different topics, so many different stories that, like, we needed to tell. And so we started working with organisations in the US. And one of those organisations was Unchained at Last. And they work with, you saw Jen in the trailer. Jen was groomed by a 40-year-old man from when she was about 14 years old. And she ended up marrying this man because in the US, you have 37 states still where child marriage is permitted with parental consent. And the trouble for Jen was that once she got married, she couldn't do anything about it because you can't get divorced because you're a minor. So you have the situation where you can't do anything about it, and then you can't get any help. As a minor, you can't go to a shelter because it's illegal for shelters to help you. So I started seeing these stories and realizing how impactful they were, and with the team that I was working with as well, which I've had some amazing people along the way. And that's how we put these stories together.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And what I was, struck with are the interventions in each of your films. There's policy interventions, there's medical interventions, there's legal interventions. I'm going to turn to Nisha, and then we'll come back and do another round. But Nisha, your film is a feature, To Kill a Tiger, and it's a full-length documentary about a 13-year-old girl named Kiran, who was raped in India, and her family's quest for justice. Let's go ahead and watch a clip, and then we'll come back to you.
जिस तरह से औरतों के साथ लगातार उत्पीड़न के मामले सामने आ रहे हैं, हमें खुद से पूछना होगा, क्या हमारे देश के बुनियादी ढांचे में कोई कमी तो नहीं?
जानते हैं ना, आपके गांव में एक घटना घटा है जिसमें एक 13 साल की बच्ची के साथ बलात्कार हुआ है।
तो लड़का या लड़की की कोई तो दो करना नहीं रहे।
बोल रहा था कि अगर और किसी को बताएगी तो मार देंगे बोल के बोला।
हाँ, उसी के सहारे हम एकदम डर भय पूरा एकदम खत्म हो जाता है।
पिता अपनी बेटी का सामूहिक बलात्कार के केस को लेकर उठा है, ये अपने आप में छोटी घटना नहीं है।
अब वो नादानी में गलती कर दिया तो क्या करे, उसको काट के फेंक दे।
गाँव में ना और सबके किसी को है
कायन कभी अगर मार भी दिया तो मेरा बच्चा सबका कहा होगा।
आपको खराब लगता है क्या बेबी? खुली जगह गई तो
एक अच्छा चीज, अच्छा भविष्य करके दिखलाएंगे, बोली के ना ऊपर वाला हम लोग को जन्म दिया है।
So, Nisha, I mean, beautiful, beautiful, hard to watch, moving film. I think the father in this, there's something so beautiful about his journey in this movie. And I'm curious too, how did you come to this story, and what were you hoping the sort of outcome would be of in the village and more broadly?
Yeah. Hi. Hi. So how did I come to this story? So I've been making films around gender-based violence, looking specifically at India, but also understanding, of course, that this is a global issue and a global phenomenon, as we've been talking about. And so with Karen, I mean, this was a story that emerged really sort of, I guess in a way, organically and accidentally. This wasn't the film that I had set out to make. I was making a completely different film, looking at masculinity and the construction of masculinity in India. Because I'd sort of realized after making several films around violence against women and girls that what we really needed to understand was men. We really had to understand how men were created, how boys become men, and where this sense of entitlement comes from. And so I was embarking on a very different film called Send Us Your Brother, which I'm still making, by the way. But that film was about a gender sensitization program, and I was focusing on the work of an NGO. They were running this program across 30 villages in the state of Jharkhand. And they were working with men and boys, and Ranjit, who's the father in To Kill a Tiger, was enrolled in this gender sensitization program. And that's literally how, it was just very organic. I was making one film, and I started following this other film. And I think at the time, none of us knew how extraordinary this family was, how exceptional this family was, how extraordinary this father, this is a man who has a grade 3 education, he's a farmer, and he instinctively and intrinsically recognized his daughter's human rights, which is something that is so rare. It's so exceptional. And really the film just kind of very organically, we just sort of kept, in Canada we're hockey players, so we follow the puck, and literally we were just following the puck, and this is what emerged. And I think for me, we talked about this earlier, but I became a documentary filmmaker, not necessarily to make documentary films. I became a documentary filmmaker to make impact, because I understood the power of story and the power of documentary to make impact. And I knew that To Kill a Tiger had that kind of potential, even though it was a film that was rooted in a very specific cultural context. The universality of the story, both in terms of what survivors experience around the world, I knew that that was something that could be globally applied, and that's when we launched Stand With Her.
That's amazing. And can you talk a little bit about how you thought about impact at the beginning, and what you were hoping success would look like, and where the evolution of that has gone?
I'm nervous, so forgive me. When did I? Okay, so I started to think about. I'm always thinking about impact, to be honest. But with this particular film, it was such a curious journey in so many ways. So with this particular film, I started to really see the potential of it in the edit room, And once we got to the rough cut stage and also eventually at fine cut stages, I started to show the film, you know, to broadcasters, to streamers. It was like, let's get this film out into the world. And, you know, like Charlotte, this is a film that took 8 years. It took 8 years to make. So I was very, very determined to get it out into the world. And we kept sharing it with streamers, broadcasters, and everyone said the same thing. Beautiful story, no one's going to watch this. Beautiful film, not for us. And so I thought to myself, okay, I've spent 8 years making this film. There is no way that I'm going to give up. And we were getting these really mixed messages also. You know, there were people, sort of Academy members who were friends of mine who'd watched the film, and they really felt strongly that it could go quite far, and you know that it was sort of a contender for an Oscar nomination. And when I heard that, I just thought, okay, this is how I make impact. I start to run an Oscar campaign, and that becomes phase one of my impact campaign. And, you know, we had no money, but we have incredible, like, just champions, like amazing champions in terms of executive producers and people that came on board once some of the celebrity EPs came on board. And so I just started to figure out, okay, how do I do this, you know? So I need celebrity support, because that's amplification. I need organizations, NGOs, that will ground the work that we're doing in sort of a foundational rigor, you know, and understanding impact and context. So I just started to kind of bring this constellation of people together, and I created this ecosystem, and it kind of continues. So.
Thank you for that, which is a perfect segue to Brian. So Brian is the CEO of Picture Motion, and you have worked over the course of 20 years in many different roles in impact with filmmakers and storytellers, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds. I had the privilege of working with you all as playing a small part on a couple of different projects around gender equity, Girls State, which was an Apple Plus documentary, and long before that, LFG, which was about female soccer players. I'm curious, sort of, you know, gender equity has been at the root of these projects and others, racial equity and other issues around justice. How do you identify a film or a show that has a potential for impact? And sort of what is the recipe for what collaborations look like to be most successful?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I would say there's a little bit of instinct that kind of comes with evaluating films for film series, you know, any type of content for perspective impact. I think impact practitioners probably view, you know, the potential for impact very differently. But for me, I have some legal training, went to law school, also, you know, worked in nonprofit as a grantee, as well as a grant maker even, and, you know, spent time in kind of corporate as a marketer. And so I really evaluate most of our campaigns, most of our films through the lens of kind of those eyes in many ways. So for legal, you know, is there a cause of action? Is there like an articulatable, you know, way in which we can drive change? Looking at a theory of change, is there a clear way that we can engage stakeholders that can make decisions that can, you know, hopefully end to change the world or change, you know, people that are impacted by this issue? And then, you know, from a marketing standpoint, is there a market? Is there an audience that, you know, will be connected to this? And that's both whether it's a general audience or whether it's like the critical decision makers for this. Is there a way in which we can connect with those partners through experiences, through screenings, through resources, through kind of various modes of education and interaction? And that's how we try to find whether, you know, we believe there's potential for success around a campaign. You know, ultimately, though, we don't look at ourselves as kind of the one size or the one part of the larger potential impact of a campaign or a project. We're, you know, one stage, I believe. There has to be a conglomerate of ways in which the project reaches audiences and those decision makers. And so our goal is just to say, how can we, you know, add value to that entire life cycle as a whole. And so that's another way in which we try to evaluate that as well. Your second question, I think, you mentioned.
Yeah, sort of, I mean, you sort of answered it, but I guess, how do you evaluate sort of like what the recipe is for a best? Like, talk a little bit more about that conglomerate. What's the secret sauce?
Yeah. For us, all of our campaigns start with a strategy phase where, we try to engage a subset or a survey of prospective, audience members, stakeholders. They could be, like I said, decision makers. They could be students. They could be educators. The folks that we see as ambassadors or the voices that are going to amplify a prospective campaign. We try to get their feedback, share the content with them, in a really limited a private stage where we can kind of understand, is this useful to their work? Because the goal is not that we are, ultimately the people who will lead change. It's really the people on the ground who are doing it every day. And so we want to first and foremost, engage them and kind of understand how we're going to build the best strategy, whether it be messaging, whether it be, resources, as I mentioned, what are the moments throughout the next 6 to 12 months where this film can show up or the project can show up in those kind of communities, whether it be at conferences or, traditional theatrical or through digital or other influencers. We try to kind of evaluate that through the strategy phase, which is traditionally about 4 to 6, maybe 8 weeks for larger campaigns, where we're having conversations anywhere between 15 to 20 of those survey, essentially a subset of what we see as the larger representative audience. And then that helps us to then build, the right assets, the right partnerships, the right calendar for impact that makes sense. And then we also think about, what those organizations doing to drive the larger issue as well, and how does this integrate into that?
That's great. I want to follow up on one thing you said, sort of, that I've been thinking a lot about, which is films that center a particular group or a particular identity of a character. For example, often we, especially with documentaries, sort of worry that we're only presenting the material to people that are already kind of true believers or engaged. How do you think about centering the experiences of people who very much need to see their identities reflected on screen and broadening the aperture to bring in other people whose hearts, minds, perceptions, activation can be changed by this film or a series of films? And particularly, we've talked a little bit about gender and centering women. If you can also sort of speak to how we bring men into gender, conversations and films that center women and gender-based violence.
Yeah, I mean, overall allyship is a critical part of all of our campaigns, and through my just experiences, as I said, in racial justice work, where bringing in people who weren't not of folks of color, ways in which they could use their role in society to drive social change. That's the way we look at most of our campaigns as well, especially when they're gender focused or gender based violence in a scenario. Who are the decision makers who are going to? They may not necessarily representative of the impacted party, but they are people who, if they see it and can do something in their everyday lives or with kind of in their sphere of influence, then those are kind of our bullseye, essentially. And then we try to just build out from there. I mean, sometimes it's also, what are 6 degrees of separation from that potential person, where it might be the children or, students of those decision makers, where it might be, general audience, to just build a groundswell online or kind of in different communities to make those people aware that people care about this issue and they should learn more and hopefully use their power for change. I think we think about that holistically and try to create an integrated campaign that can reach all those different audiences. Like I said, not in a one-size-fits-all, because my wife is an educator. I've learned through her experiences, everyone learns differently, and so we try to incorporate that as well into our campaigns, whether it's audio, whether it's visual, whether it's through education, whether it's through a more cultural experience. We're trying to build that through our full campaign life cycle. So
that's great. I'm curious for all of you, but particularly for Charlotte and for Nisha. We're living in really unprecedented times here in the U.S. This was not in our script, so you can tell me you don't want to answer this question. But it strikes me that these two projects have come out at a time where gender is very much under attack, where women are very much under attack in many different ways. We have, the Epstein files are looming, And Hollywood seems uniquely scared in this moment as well. And I'm curious, sort of, as you've brought these projects into the world in this very fraught time, where have you been surprised, I guess, both positively and negatively, about opportunities for impact and also barriers that you might not have anticipated? And I'll go to Tanisha and then back to you, Charlotte, if that's okay. And if you don't want to answer the question, that's fine.
No, I really want to. Yeah. So, some of the people that are in the room today are partners from Rocco Films, Kristen and Christine. And just in terms of, so one of the things that we're doing with Stand With Her is we've created an educational curriculum and a 1-hour version of the film, which is available for free for educators, and also a streaming version on the Kinema platform. And I think, we were really anxious about, God, is anyone going to adopt this curriculum? What's going to happen? And it's getting this stuff out into the world is already kind of an uphill battle, right? And then you've got, obviously, not just what's happening in the US politically, but how that also impacts geopolitics and, the rollback of women's rights that we're seeing in the United States. It's global, because the US is a cultural leader, right? It does set precedent, and that's what's happening. It's extremely dangerous. But I would say that we've actually been pleasantly surprised at the response to the curriculum. And one of the things that's been so amazing is we get these sort of bi-weekly updates from Rocco, and we've got this there's this interactive map, and we get to see the number of institutes in the United States as well as globally that are currently looking at the curriculum. And that's really, really heartening. I also just want to, because I think just in terms of what you're talking about, I feel that, and this is really something that we're trying to do with Stand With Her, it's really a campaign that is focused on mobilizing people. It's about shifting the culture so that gender-based violence and the rights of women and girls become so deeply entrenched in our values as human rights that they become unmovable. That, it doesn't matter what political party comes into power. We as human beings feel so strongly about our equality that we fight for them. We fight for the rights. So I sort of feel like, yes, we're living in very dark times in a way, and yet for me there's always opportunity, and I see so much light in this moment. I mean, look at this room, right? So
that's really beautiful. Charlotte, I'm curious for your reflections on this.
I concur. No, truthfully, I just finished a 6-month impact campaign with Brian and Juliet and at Picture Motion, and I couldn't have been happier with just how that's gone and the interactions we've had with different people. And right at the beginning, I said, I know we're in a tough moment in time for everybody, and we don't have to look at that. We can just look at the things that we're working on because they're not political. These are things that we can all agree upon. We can all agree that it's not okay for a child to get married. We can all agree that it's not okay for someone to throw acid in someone's face. These are the things that we can agree upon. So, and bringing in partners who also are male allies, like Brian was talking about, which we have done, and running, screenings and impact campaigns with these partners, and talking about how men and boys can get activated and get involved. I always feel bad because I've got 4 boys, and all the work that I do is about girls, and they're like, Mum, what about us? But the truth is, it's all about society. It's not about girls or boys or political aspirations. This is about making a difference in a way that we all can do, no matter what our political, political views are. This is about what we can all do together, and that's how I address it, and that's how I hope that the people that work with us as well will look at it.
Can you share a particular moment or a particular man or boy or story that you feel particularly proud of or that has stuck with you?
I have got a little bit of a story. Yeah, so we recently did a screening for a festival in New York, and I was there. My director was there, and afterwards, this gentleman came up to my director, Dina Heisel Cornejo, and said, I want you to know I love the film. Thank you for making it. I'm a pediatrician. I work in Brooklyn, and I had a young girl come into my practice, and I examined her, and I didn't know what it was. I was horrified. I had to leave the room, and I went to speak to 5 of my colleagues, 5 of my peers, and only one of them knew what it was. And it was female genital mutilation. And this is a doctor, this is a pediatrician in Brooklyn. FGMC, or female genital mutilation or cutting, affects and impacts 130 million women and girls globally. This guy is just one guy who's come up and said, you know, I know about this now because this happened to me. But thanks to him, like, we've now put together a further campaign that we're going to embark upon, working with hospitals and teaching hospitals in the US. That's where we're starting, because we have to start with a little bit. So we're starting across the US, doing screenings with hospitals and students. And we actually had a screening on Tuesday with the Mayo Clinic and with some students who'd organised their own screening, and we did a panel with them as well. So just like that, male allyship can come in many forms, and it doesn't have to be one thing or another thing, but just saying, oh my God, I know what this is, and I know what you're going through, and I want to stand with you and help you.
That is staggering. Also, just for context, so 130 million is a number that comes up in my work a lot. 130 million is the number of people in the US who are caring for or a child or a loved one, which is, like, everybody knows somebody who is doing that, or multiple people, or are themselves. So, like, that's a lot of people that have dealt with this, and it's so invisible until you see a film like this, or you've experienced it yourself, or you know someone who has. So thank you so much for what you're doing to bring awareness and the ripple effects that you've described. I think that's really, really powerful. Brian, I want to sort of come back to you on this question from your perspective as well, thinking about the financing and the distribution of projects like this in this time, and where you see opportunities, where you've seen bigger barriers than maybe you've seen before, and reflections on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone here knows that things have changed so much, I think, in the last few years for distribution, for film financing, particularly in the impact arena. We've seen significant disruption, whether because of philanthropy, whether you're, obviously have government grant making, things have changed. I think what I've seen, I was looking back at some case studies this morning, some really great examples of, funding both campaigns as well as production, actually come from a lot of times nonprofit organizations themselves. There's a couple of films we've worked on over the last few years, or series even, where the actual nonprofit itself, through their storytelling initiative, their marketing initiative, decided that they wanted to create content to support their broader work, whether it be fundraising, whether it be just building awareness with stakeholders. Until We're Home is a great example. We work with an organization called Community Solutions. Last year into this year, it's a series about homelessness and kind of the complex issues around homelessness. They got a MacArthur grant to support, their larger storytelling effort, but because they were deeply embedded in the process of making this project, their theory of change was clearly articulated through every piece of content, as well as through our campaign as a whole. And so, they were able to ensure that we had no guardrails in sharing that film. We hosted, I think, over 20 screenings with different partners. We even had Saks Fifth, their employee resource group, shared it, and then we won an Ashorty Award just a couple months ago from that particular campaign. And it just saw a life cycle of really great. The film itself or the series itself was available on YouTube, but then we made it available through kind of our community screening efforts. And so thinking about those different modalities or those different audiences was important as well. I think another great example is we're working with a film right now called American Solitaire, which it's a scripted film about gun violence and gun violence prevention, veteran PTSD or trauma. And the filmmaker was really clear in ensuring, first and foremost, that they had the production budget, but they also had marketing budget and publicity budget. And I think that's important. As we as filmmakers, as creatives, when you're thinking about creating that content, it's not just that the film is done and it's going to be out there. I think you really have to be building in the budget and who are the partners that are going to support the entire life cycle as you're developing at the early stage. And so we're able to, we've done a couple of larger screenings in the fall, from CAA to Coronado Film Festival where it premiered, to Los Angeles premiere and the Bay Area premiere. And then we're going to be doing a theatrical screening kind of run starting in April. We're doing grassroots screenings across the country with a variety of partners like Brady, kind of other veterans organizations. But they were really clear in making sure that first and foremost, they just knew that they needed to budget, or that they actually created a budget that a funder could come in and see, okay, what is the potential change, but also what's the audience that goes with that. So I think those are just, it's really important to start early. Don't wait until post-production. Really think about how you're going to reach people with the content, because it's just getting harder to say, hey, it's going to be acquired by a platform. You're going to kind of recoup the dollars immediately. You have to be thinking about that long term. So.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference in creating a campaign or measuring success with a documentary or unscripted versus scripted narrative?
I mean, having worked at Disney and, worked across their content, obviously more general audience engagement is, it's not as surgical. When I think about our campaigns, you're going to hit a wide audience. Like I worked on Black Panther, I worked on Encanto, worked on things like Soul. We thought about impact, through our audience engagement, but we also knew that it's just going to reach, millions or hundreds of thousands of people, whether it be through theater screenings and other experiences. So there's less of a general percentage of that audience that's going to drive the level of impact, but there's also just a wider net of audience members that you can engage. And so you just have to think about, okay, where do they fit in, where they are on the continuum of change. Some people are more informed. Some people are coming to a project, for a specific reason. Like Black Panther, we used it to teach kids, particularly kids of color, about I worked with an Imagineer about biomimicry. He was a biomimicrist. We would literally host hackathons utilizing the idea of Wakanda technology, and they would develop their own pitches around that. And then it was a way for them to start thinking about how they work in the Disney ecosystem. So it was just kind of approaching them differently, or it was actual racial justice leaders thinking about how do they, because they can get all these people to go to screenings or the theater, they can sign them up to vote. So Wakanda the Vote was a massive effort that was built out of Move for Black Lives and really just a cultivation or a coalition of partners who knew if they have this many people that they're engaging, that they can get them on the track to not only vote for the presidential election, but it was actually a massive support system for the 2018, midterm elections, which led to the largest number of women of color being voted into Congress at that time. So you have to think about kind of all these different ways in which either general audience or, obviously the direct stakeholder audiences can be engaged through the content and ancillary kind of storytelling and messaging.
Nisha, I'm going to come back to you, and I think we'll open it up to questions for a minute. Charlotte, your example is still just sitting with me. And Nisha, you have recently started this Men as Allies campaign with Tequila Tiger as well. And what you said earlier about sort of regardless of the political moment, there are just things that we as a people need to agree are right and that are wrong. I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the campaign that you are launching and what you're hoping to see from that, and then we'll open it up, so get your questions ready.
Yeah, I'm just going to say something about allyship, if I may. And it's a word that doesn't sit well with me. And because I think what it does, and I understand why we use it, but I think for me what it does is it doesn't quite capture the fullness of what I'm trying to do and what I think needs to be done in terms of this particular conversation and reframing the conversation and expanding the conversation. So it's really about our human rights. It's about a shared belief in our equality. And I think when we talk about men as allies, I feel like we're still kind of reinforcing a certain power dynamic subconsciously. And we're also, I think what we've done sort of I think this is something that the gender-based violence movement is really starting to recognize and starting to grapple with, is the fact that we have created this sort of us versus them conversation. We've made men feel guilty. And yes, of course, there is no doubt that the majority of violence that is committed against the world is committed by men against women, but not all men are violent, and it's actually a small percentage. And so I think we need to sort of look at this in a really different way. And so one of the things that I'm doing, and it was inspired by To Kill a Tiger, but it's a side campaign that I'm working on with an incredible partner called Equimundo, who you know,
yes,
of course,
very well.
and you as well. And we're working with a global advertising agency, and with them we're creating this sort of 3 to 5 year campaign. I imagine it's probably going to be 5 years, but it's really, do you remember the Dove Real Beauty campaign and what that did for the conversation around women and self-esteem and beauty? And so, I had this idea of we need to create an equivalent for men. So where we're actually allowing all of us as human beings to understand the concept of gender in a way that it's sort of a construct and a system that has imprisoned all of us. And so that's, because when we start to make it about the system and not the people that are in the system, suddenly we understand that we're all united and that it's something that has cost all of us. Yeah. And so that's really the point of With Love Dad.
Yeah. That's, go ahead, Brian.
No, I think I echo that sentiment so much. I think whether it's gender-based violence or racial violence, I think there's such parallels in the idea that, we are all affected by these issues. In racial justice work, you think about violence, police violence as a great example. When we were doing racial justice work, we were talking about the fact that there's an increased disparity in violence by the police against Black and brown populations, but because of the ultra-violent community that we live in policing in this country, there's also an increased chance as a white person that you're going to interact with the police in a negative and violent way as well here in the United States than any other developed country in the world. So if you don't kind of see that as an issue that you care about that might affect you or your community, and we've seen it, now more than ever, then we it's not an allyship, it's a co-conspirator, engagement opportunity. And so I think there's just ways in which, there's a really great, I think it might have been Toni Morrison or another person who talked about back in the day when lynchings were happening and you saw, families come out and watch, that impacted those people, whether they be young people or whether they be, older people. We're psychologically impacted in ways that have deep harm to us as society, and so we all kind of have to collectively work together.
It's the world that we want to build, right? It's fundamentally.
Charlotte, did you have a comment on this?
No, I think they said it.
Okay.
I think they covered it,
Yeah, I really appreciate, we think a lot at New America. We actually just wrote for the entertainment community a piece about breaking out of a gendered box and breaking down zero. So I think the same is true in economics. We have a piece around jobs and family and work-family stress to break down gender roles between women and men that are so arbitrary but culturally rooted. My colleague Haley, who is sitting here, does a lot of work on men in care. Also, we work closely with Equimundo. And I think in particular, sort of this it's global, and it's American, sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like if I'm up, you're down, is so deeply rooted and such a factor in so many of the challenges that we face. So thank you for naming that. With our last couple minutes, I want to open it up to a couple of questions. Maybe we can just take 2 questions and then answer them together in some way, and then we'll close out. So anybody have a burning question they want to ask? Yes.
This is mostly for Vicki and Brian, but feel free. Firstly, thank you so much for...
A mic is coming your way.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm a little hoarse, so sorry. First, I wanted to appreciate the candor and like the forthrightness with which you're approaching these like very difficult topics and also exposing them to broader audiences. I guess my question is around the ways in which y'all are pivoting in the face of a regime which is in the United States that is actively interested in using media and legal and policy institutions as a cudgel against the kind of already marginalized narratives that you're trying to expose further, and the ways in which you are adapting in the current moment.
That's a great question. Do we have one other question at the same time, or no? Oh, Margot.
Thank you so much. Wonderful panel, and I love your film. That was an amazing film. I was so excited to come today. A question for all 3 of you, which is just a general question about how you measure impact. Just a couple maybe examples of whether it's policy outcomes or indicators. Just that would be great. Thanks.
That's great. Yeah, I will just say on the first question, one of the ways I think that I've been thinking about sort of how do you continue to do this work in a dark time. I do a lot of policy work also. I've been at the forefront of trying to pass paid family and medical leave programs in this country and continuing to look for states where we can do that. Virginia might be next. Telling the stories of impact at a policy level, and then the work that we do with creatives is really like helping to infuse some of those hopeful stories and also the challenges that we all share across lines into particularly scripted content, so that people are seeing these stories with the media that they're consuming as they're going through their lives. And we have research from audiences in the US that is on our website and on the cards that you have here that says this is what audiences want. This isn't, often in Impact we talk about giving audiences broccoli with their meal, but actually what our research shows is that these stories that are real and complex and gritty, and both like honest and difficult, but also hopeful, they are the meal, they're not the broccoli. So that's one thing. And Brian, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think about how I speak to younger kind of emerging practitioners in impact, particularly, and there's a level of like hopelessness or even just like, saddening of the moment that we're living in. And I always have to kind of take it back to the fact that we've been in this moment before, obviously not specific, but there, is incredible documentation of advocacy, particularly in Hollywood, particularly obviously in racial justice and civil rights, for now decades and generations, where we've kind of we've progressed, and then there's been a pendulum swing back. And so I think just learning from those moments, particularly now, we're thinking about, like she said, scripted content. How do we reach audiences differently? Obviously people are consuming content differently, whether it be through audio, whether it be through short form kind of digital content, just incorporating more of those tactics into our work. But it's still the same theory of change, essentially. How do we reach decision makers in ways in which they can utilize the information to create changes in their sphere of influence? And so, sticking to that as a common practice is really important. But the modality may change overall.
And then to the measurement question, yeah.
Yeah, so we can, it's difficult to measure impact. It's difficult to measure everything. We have audience and markers, and we can track how many screenings we've done and everything else. But for me, it's the personal impact we have on all the people that we film with, that share their stories with us and their outcomes. And Jen, who you saw before, now has gone on to do a law degree. So things like that, impacts like that. And I wonder if you could just put the unmuted slide back up on again, Mike or Max or Matt.
One of the M's.
One of the M's at the back. Can you put the slide back up? So we're always looking for people to get involved and people to help with what we're doing. So if please when they put it back up again, scan the QR code and get involved. And that's how we measure impact, by people getting involved and being part of the movement, because this is a movement to make change. And what Nisha's doing as well, we're both on the Clinton Global Initiative Committee together, working against gender-based violence and sexual violence.
Yeah, I mean, I would really agree with Charlotte. I mean, there are things that are actually kind of measurable and actually kind of quantifiable, right? There's data that we can sort of glean. But I would say, like, I know that one of your questions earlier, like, when I think about the impact, it's really what you were saying, Charlotte. When I think about the impact, for me, there's two things. There's how has this changed her, Kieran, you know, the woman who's at the center of the film. What has it done for her? And it is extraordinary what A, sharing her story has meant for her and her family, and B, being part of Stand With Her, how she has found agency, a voice, confidence. You know, she's part of our movement, she's part of our campaign. And that to me is so extraordinary. And I think also for me, the last thing I'll say is the importance of working with the communities so that this process isn't an extractive one, you know, especially with documentary. It's almost like they have to be the first site of impact. You have to uplift the community. Otherwise, you're not really making impact, you know? It's a different kind of impact.
That's a great place to end this on. Thank you so much. And maybe if we could just scroll through the QR codes for Unmuted and for To Kill a Tiger again, so folks can take photos if they want to. Thank you all so much, Charlotte, Nisha, and Brian, for this wonderful panel.